What's a dirty secret about your workplace that people shouldn't be knowing? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. I work in marine mammal rescue. Sea lions are cute, but OMG, they stink. We were actually taught in training that you can't approach one from the front without holding your breath. They like to roar and huff when startled as a sort of self-defense, and it will basically knock a person out. We laughed about it in training, and I didn't take it too seriously. Until my third day on the job, I approach a sea lion, and it rears up and gives the biggest yawn huff roar right into my face from 2 feet away. I fell to my knees, puked, and was basically incapacitated and lightheaded for several minutes. Did not make that mistake again. Answer: we've had a lot of sea lions in the past 2 years in Monterey, CA, and the smell. I live a mile from the wharf where they congregate, and when there's a lot of them, you can smell them from my house. It smells like rotten fish, plus that stuff the cats use to mark their territory, plus urine. So lovely. I did read something about how with global warming, the bay is more hospitable to great whites, so the sea lions come to shore for protection more often. I think we'll be dealing with this stank forever now. Story 2. I'm a handyman. Contractors' favorite saying is, can't see it from my house. You ever see those videos from home inspectors pointing out all the crooked or broken chute in brand new construction? It's because the builders don't care. And then once all the cracks start forming in your walls, they go, oh, that's just the house settling. Nope, they built it in the first place, and now their shoddy work is shining through. Answer: oh man, I knew a contractor who was known for drinking on the job, OSHA violations, and paying under the table. He has some great charisma and a whole pack of people who have helped him weasel out of some legal issues or kept quiet about them. But he does the shoddiest work in general, except, of course, on his own house. Or if you were a good buddy, maybe your work turned out okay enough. But anybody in the field or had contracted work will warn you to stay far away from the guy. Granted, can't trust many contractors in general for this kind of behavior, but it was pretty appealing since I looked up to the guy as a kid and had my views shattered as I became more aware. Story 3. I work in a plastic bag plant. Everything in here runs on electricity. The owners tapped into a power line that runs through the property, and for more than 10 years, they didn't pay a dime. They made tens of millions. When the fraud was found out, they blamed an employee who was from Latin America and were given a $200K fine. You can't find the story online anymore. They used their community connections to have it erased and flat out deny it ever happened. Who says crime doesn't pay? Answer: back in the late 90s, I worked in a restaurant that was attached to a hotel in Cape May. The owners of the hotel leased the restaurant to my boss. Best boss ever. Anyway, towards the end of the summer, he gets the astronomically large electric bill from the electric company. He never said how much, but he was pissed. Company sent someone down to check things out. Turns out the hotel owners had somehow connected all of the first floor hotel rooms' electricity to the restaurant. My boss's lease wasn't renewed at the end of the season. Don't know if he had to pay for it all, but guess who reopened that restaurant next season? The hotel owner's kid. Every time I go by that place, I want to throw a brick through the front window. Going to Cape May? Don't stay at a hotel named after a Canadian city. Story 4. I used to work in the hotel industry, and a lot more people die in hotels than get publicized. Answer: one of the worst things I came across in the industry was a woman who basically was trying to starve herself to death in the room. The manager of the hotel next door that we sometimes would share business with personally brought her over to us, saying that she was staying with them, but they had to ask her to leave, which was a red flag looking back. She didn't give our staff any problems, but after she overstayed her reservation by a couple days, she had never come to the desk to get her keys reprogrammed, and none of us had had any contact with her. Housekeeping was concerned because she had the "Do Not Disturb" sign up, and they heard her dog barking. After a wellness check, a friend of hers came to pick her up, and she explained what happened. It turns out she had sold her house, but the one she was trying to buy fell through, and with nowhere else to go, she just planned on laying there until she died. My manager was pissed at the other hotel for pushing her onto us, and I was pissed that nobody noticed anything was off for a couple of days. Story 5. As a longtime probation officer, one thing that surprises people is how many unusual, creative sentences we have to enforce. Most people think such sentences are banned by the 8th Amendment, but that's not really how that works. For one, most of the time the offender takes the plea deal for the unorthodox sentence willingly to avoid prison, so they never appeal on 8th Amendment grounds anyways, since that would just result in resentencing and going to prison. Occasionally, such sentences make the news, but many don't. The most notable one I worked was in 2016, which did make the news, When a woman was being sentenced for a serious case of animal neglect, the judge gave her a choice: incarceration or spending a day sitting in the stinkiest, smelliest part of the county dump to see how it feels to live in filth. She chose the latter. We had to contact the dump and say, "Hey, judge's orders. Help us find the absolutely most revolting place here." They didn't believe us until we showed them the paperwork. I took it seriously and found the nastiest place there for her. By the end, I think she was wishing she'd taken the jail time. Story 6. Work as a gardener but specialize in invasive species remediation. It's ridiculously unregulated and underpaid for what is incredibly dangerous work. My main thing is H. Mantegazeanum, giant hogweed, and I've saw people treating it in shorts and a t-shirt. The sap is phototoxic and can cause third-degree burns in sunlight for up to 7 years. I would happily do the paperwork and additional licensing if it meant untrained and under-equipped people weren't risking life-changing injuries for a few $100. Story 7. No longer employed there, but when I worked at a certain big box retailer of home improvement products, we would occasionally see hopeful strangers sitting in our lobby with boxes or other packaging waiting for meetings. These people were small-time inventors of new products and were trying to get them on the shelves of our retail locations. What they didn't know is that, as condition for consideration of carrying the product, they would be required to turn one or more samples over to the company to be examined by the product teams. If the product showed promise, one of those samples would be shipped to another country where it would be thoroughly dissected and analyzed so that an equivalent product could be developed under the house label, with enough modifications to not infringe on any patents, of course, and that product was what would end up on the shelf. I was told that a lawsuit pretty much ended the practice, and now they don't allow pitches from independent producers anymore. They just wait to see what other retailers are already carrying and selling well and copy those. Story 8. A local politician got in trouble for doing jerk stuff. Turns out he was employed by my company and no one had ever heard of him. He was a consultant that used his position in government to steer contracts to the company. Story 9. I sang opera professionally for a long time. The amount of sexual harassment and assault that is not only overlooked but excused is absolutely abhorrent. When Domingo was called out, I had a colleague who furiously defended him. Her argument was that he was always nice to her. Well, he must be a good dude then, if he was nice to one lady who was close to his age and was already an established artist. He preyed on young women early in their career, dumbass. Our old general director didn't give two shits about most of the artists and would repeatedly hire one particular conductor who groped a colleague on stage. It's getting a little better, but it's far, far too slow. Story 10. UK universities get most of their money from the tuition fees of overseas students. They will accept weak applicants and overlook poor performance if it means the overseas tuition money keeps rolling in. Story 11. I worked at a goat farm and we make a lot of buck rags to sell. Rags wiped all over billy buck goats during their mating season to get their scent on it. The official use is that people can buy them to check if their does are in heat, to see their reaction to the scent, but I knew that 95 of the people who buy them are using them to discipline their children. Apparently it's a thing. Make them put their nose inside the jar with the buck rag for a minute or two, and oh boy, they won't be act up again anytime soon. Story 12. I work in a grocery store. We don't clean the lids of the yogurt or sour cream tubs if the lid falls off, and we just put it back on the product. It can fall on the floor in a puddle of milk, doesn't matter. At most, we might wipe it off on our apron or with a paper towel if available. Bulk produce items do fall on the floor regularly. We just pick them up and put them back on the shelf if it isn't damaged. If a container of berries or tomatoes pops open, we'll just put them all back in and put it back on the shelf. Nothing is rinsed off first. Almost nothing is actually made in the bakery. Everything either comes in already made or in portioned pieces of dough they throw into the oven. The only thing they really do is decorate cakes, donuts, bread, and bagels. Even most of the cakes come in with icing already on them. They just add some extra decorations. All of the seafood comes in frozen and is kept frozen even though the sign says never frozen. In fact, the seafood people will grab bags of frozen shrimp off the shelf and put it in the display case. You are literally paying more for some thawed-out shrimp. Answer: all of the seafood comes in frozen and is kept frozen even though the sign says never frozen. It's been my understanding that even freshly caught fish is still frozen on the ships that are catching it. What I was told is that they fish all the way out to sea and all the way back, so there's no way that stuff caught on day one is going to last long enough to maintain quality throughout the journey and then off the boat to be sold by a local retailer, much less anywhere inland. Don't know how accurate this is, so any knowledgeable insight is appreciated. Story 13. My company will hire you solely based on physical attraction. My boss has told me that he feels if there are young, attractive females in the office, more employees will want to come in because they'll want to flirt talk with these girls. Story 14. I once worked for a polling company, the kind that runs surveys for elections and marketing purposes. I learned that numbers can be made to prove anything remotely plausible and to not trust election polls when they are too tight. Story 15. We're shipping dangerously corrosive chemicals across the country in tanks that have repeatedly failed safety inspections. Very few get pulled over, so it's cheaper for the company to pay the fines instead of repairing the tanks or buying brand new ones. And with all the slashes to funding, firings, and relaxation of environmental regulations, it's getting even easier to do so. Story 16. I work in public service. I don't know if I'd call it a dirty secret, but when the government started stocking men's rooms with free pads tampons, we all agreed to turn a blind eye to the one trans dude taking them all regularly and dropping them off at the local homeless shelter. He's the only one affected, and he's keeping homeless women well supplied on the government's dime. Story 17. I work in lab testing high fructose corn syrup. You'll be surprised how much bacteria, yeast, mold, and metal pieces Coca-Cola and Pepsi allow in. Story 18. Worked in a grocery store. It's probably a well-known fact, but expired products and those that were about to expire were used in the preparation of various salads, baked goods, and so on. Story 19. Used to work at an office that prided itself on winning awards for being environmentally friendly. The awards hung behind the front desk, and they would bug employees every day about how hard it was to get the achievement. One year, they designated me as the environmental rep, and I would fill out the application for the award. I found out that getting a passing grade was shockingly easy. For instance, a large portion of the questions asked how much we recycle. Our office had recycle bins, but our landlords threw that stuff back in the trash when they picked it up. Don't need to mention that on the form. Like at least 10, 20 of questions didn't understand what our company did, so we marked those as NA, vastly overstate your contributions. If a prompt asked if you ever returned lots of product you didn't use, describe it as so, even if it's just returning one item at Target. Shift responsibility. No, that wasn't us throwing away dumpsters of material. It was just the contractor we're paying, so we're not going to mention that. Easiest of all when a question says, rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. Always give 10s as long as you didn't have to back up the claim. Answer. 1 year, they designated me as the environmental rep, and I would fill out the application for the award. I found out that getting a passing grade was shockingly easy. A lot of these awards you see large corporations tooting their own horn over are just bullshit that they just essentially pay for. A common one I've seen is something along the lines of Location X's 100 Best Managed Companies. I've worked for one of these best managed companies, and it was actually the worst managed place I'd ever worked for. Utterly dysfunctional business who had horrible retention problems, both for employees and management. Higher-ups getting fired for theft or embezzlement alcohol or drug abuse, sexual harassment, assault, etc. Constantly losing contracts for failing to fulfill them, but then bribing individuals to get the contract back, etc. But they just paid for the sizable application fee because it looked good on their advertising and attracted both clients and entry-level employees to be part of the meat grinder. Well worth it for them. Personally, whenever I see any sort of company with that particular kind of award, I avoid them like the plague. Story 20. Don't ever buy anything marinated from a butcher meat case. It is how the older meats are sold, the marinade covers the smell. Story 21. There are a lot of relationships among colleagues. Story 22. I work in dementia care. Your grandparents get really creative with the old swear words when they're less inhabited and they have the greatest sense of humor. Story 23. I mean, it's not dirty, nor really is it a secret, but the hamburgers, meat patties, that don't sell at Wendy's get taken off the grill and go right into a container in the refrigerator below the grill. Those become tomorrow's chili. The chicken in the chicken sandwiches that does not sell, those go into tomorrow's crispy chicken salads. Back when Wendy's had salad bars, the buns that didn't sell today became tomorrow's garlic bread. Story 24. Not my current workplace, but I work for a nonprofit that focused on a specific medical condition. They did good work, and the local chapters were great, but the staff at the national level was unhinged. One year at the national conference, top-level staff had bloody letters shoved under their hotel doors. They had forced out the national director because it came out that she'd left the country permanently with her assistant affair partner and hadn't actually done any work in more than 2 years. The letters threatened to trash the org's reputation and ruin the work they were doing if any of it came out. They just received a massive donation and couldn't risk it. So the whole thing was hushed up. Story 25. I'm a scientist and I work in a pretty well-known institution that houses a lot of scientists that are very popular with the public, particularly folks on Reddit and the like. Pretty much every one of these guys, and they are all guys, are the most disgusting, insupportable lechers. I have had to intervene so many times on behalf of female graduate students and postdocs who are getting really harassed, and generally nothing happens to these men. Finally, after literally decades of an institutional culture like this, a few scientists were let go after they committed criminal offenses that had physical evidence and witnesses. Even then, it was only after months and months of paid leave for them. And I just saw one of these guys back the other day, so I guess even that didn't stick. Your hero's probably one of these guys. Answer. There was a high-profile report a few years ago in Australia when a bright young surgical student went to the media and reported that her supervisor undermined and destroyed her career as a future brain surgeon. Why? Because she refused to get on her knees and provide favors to him on request. The senior medical body agreed her story was likely true, but there was no consequences for him. She couldn't get her dream career back. Nothing. Even other surgeons who sympathized with her said it was just a BJ. She should have just done it. Story 26. Software engineer here. Worked for several tech companies in all the US tech hubs. AI is not the magic you think it is. Sometimes it's just a really big decision tree. Story 27. All of the big four accounting firms are involved in extremely unethical conduct. What truly goes on at the high level at all four of them is heinous, and to think that any of them are independent is a joke. They also treat their best and brightest workers like absolute shoot by bullying, gaslighting them relentlessly into overwork. One need only spend time on the accounting subreddit to see the effects of that particular abuse. Answer. A college friend of mine committed suicide from bullying at PwC. He was in his early 30s with a wife and baby. They had made him convinced that just to leave would mean he was a total failure. Since then, and unconnectedly, he's fallen across a branch of crime so organized it goes all the way up. It's a way of getting away with anything, but the model it works perfectly for is money laundering. It's not bad for public sector embezzlement. Deloitte springs to mind immediately, and Ernst Young, but all of them. Anyone remember Arthur Anderson? It can backfire on the institution, but until the individuals go to jail and the lawyers with them, it won't stop. Story 28. I worked for a medical research company. All those research methods that they're not supposed to do because it's illegal here, yeah, they just go to other countries to do that. I had to take care of the machine that had all the research and information on the experiments they were doing in South America. Answer. I know of a certain surgical robotic system that was being tested on humans in Panama, among other places, during a time period where I personally witnessed it required 4 replacements during a single hour-long period of time. As in, you had to replace the entire system 4 times to get 1 hour of runtime from it in an operating suite. Because parts of the software kept failing, and when that happened, it took 30-45 minutes to reboot, pass self-tests, and be ready to go again. That was several years ago, but I know I will never allow that cursed system to be used in a procedure on me. Story 29. I have co-workers that know my Reddit username and regularly look at my comments or replies. They, however, don't know that I know that they know. It is super obvious even though they think they are being sly, spying on me for some reason. They mix up things I say in real life versus comments I've left on Reddit and cannot keep it straight. I've known for quite some time, so every once in a while I throw in some crazy shoot, and I can tell when they've read it because their demeanor towards me changes. I have a dislike for certain types of politics. They mimic my sentiments when I make any type of Reddit comment about it. Anyways, cat's out of the bag, boys. Now, just wondering to myself if any of you will have the balls to say, we have been spying on you, even though you use certain subreddits as a form of self-help. We are all reading it. Instead of focusing on me, focus on fixing your broken marriages, rocky and unhappy home lives, and your gambling and substance addiction problems. Don't worry about me, it'll be fine. Story 30. I worked at a closed donation sorter exporter for cash under the table. All of those donation bins you see in parking lots with different charities written on them, the bins are all owned by one company who donates a tiny percentage to charity to be able to use the charity name. All clothes and shoes are exported to Africa for profit. Everything else is trash and goes in the garbage. Toys, books, art, digital media, electronics. The company was run by 4 fairly recent immigrants, and every single one of them had a late model car and owned property in a very HOL area. They did allow the employees to pick through and take any and all rejects, however, which allowed me to have a thriving side hustle, flipping games, movies, and toys for the few years I worked there. Story 31. My office moved locations, and in doing so, mail for the old office would still be delivered. I got the mail one day, and it was addressed to Faces of Death. My new office is where they would produce these horrendous movies, if you are of the age where you remember these commercials. I showed this to only 2 coworkers, and nobody else knows, or else they would freak out. Story 32. Some schools don't let students with special needs take standardized tests because it'll bring down their overall scores, which means less funding. Answer: I mean, letting kids in spec ed caused our school to fail standardized testing pretty regularly, and with that came major funding cuts. NJ has one of the best funded spec ed programs in the country, so people from all over the country and world moved to NJ to get their kids in the program, which means we had a way higher spec ed to standard student ratio than most school districts. And since the mandate meant that the spec ed classes got funding first, it meant a lot of school improvements and programs were cut year over year by the No Child Left Behind bill that required standardized testing for everyone that determined funding. My high school had way fewer programs than schools in similarly wealthy zip codes in the rest of the country. Obviously, the problem was mostly with the No Child Left Behind bill hinging funding on standardized test scores. But asking a kid who has the mental capacity of a 4-year-old to take a high school standardized test is honestly cruel for everyone involved. Everyone lost in the end. So keeping those kids from taking testing to make sure your school keeps getting funding seems like the best possible solution to a rigged system. Story 33. I work in tax collection for the DMV. The majority of employees here are highly incompetent and are consistently collecting taxes and fees, improperly sometimes charging too much or too little based on the situation. The supervisors are usually too busy to be able to always correct mistakes and double-check the fees. Since the taxpayers usually don't know all of the laws in regards to vehicle tax collection, the mistakes just go on and on with no one knowing about the errors. In the collector's defense, the tax codes are ridiculously numerous and difficult to understand and are constantly changing when lawmakers rewrite the rules. Story 34. I work in a manufacturing-related industry. We tout how much effort we're putting into making our consumer products eco-friendly and green, which really does have an impact. But the amount of waste our day-to-day operations generate is staggering. When I was working from home during COVID, receiving samples and contracts and other documents to review and sign, I was filling up 4 or 5 big trash bags per week with all the plastic shippers and styrofoam padding that came along with those. Imagine that X hundred people doing similar work across the org. Now that we're back in office, we have to have trash collection come by multiple times a day. And this doesn't even touch on how many next-day international air shipments we send back and forth, how many pieces the factory scrap due to small defects, and how many unsold products go straight to the landfills after languishing in a climate-controlled warehouse for a year. I guess the point I'm getting at is, trying to reduce your personal carbon footprint is a noble goal. Don't abandon it, but real change will have to come from holding corporations accountable for the waste they generate. Answer: wholeheartedly agree. I work for a nonprofit that redistributes a lot of corporate waste, dead stock, misprints, slight defects, returns to people in need. It is extraordinarily hard to convince brands to donate their cast-offs at all. Most choose to incinerate or otherwise destroy them so as not to dilute the brand. But also the volume is absolutely staggering. We distribute more than 10 million items a year. Probably at least 7 mil is corporate waste, and we don't even scratch the surface of what our largest corporate partners throw away every year. Also can verify that big brands straight up copy designs from smaller brands. Like, we'll get the original and the copy donated at the same time, and they're almost identical, just different tags. Story 35. Companies are willing to hold on to insurance agents who do illegal or unethical stuff as long as they keep bringing in new business. Makes me sick how I've seen blatant ethical and legal violations in this industry just for the sake of people selling a policy, and the company protects them simply because they make the company money. Story 36. If a customer dropped a fork, we would go in the kitchen and just wipe it with a tissue. I told the chef that was really bad for the customer. He said, wipe it or F off anyways, so I quit yesterday. Story 37. I've worked in education for over 15 years now. not as a teacher, but in various support positions. Schools and school districts have tons of creative ways to juice their school grades, graduation rates, test score averages. Many of those involve recommending failing students enroll at alternative education charters, home education, and private schools. It's practically an open secret, and every spring you get waves of seniors who meet with guidance counselors and are recommended these options. This is why I don't place much value education rankings. Answer: I went to a magnet high school. It required high scores on state-level testing in middle school to get in, and had lots of APs focused on math and science. I had a rough life as a teen. Parents divorced, verbally abusive step-parent, food insecurity, etc. Senior year, I got permission to take half days so I could work once I was 18, despite the fact that I was barely passing. Come graduation, I was failing a handful of classes and was in major jeopardy of outright failure. I just wasn't in a life situation to care much about grades. I was trying to survive and also have fun like most other teens. One of my teachers approached me, telling me I needed to retake my final for her to pass. She gave me my failing copy with corrections to work off of, and gave me the whole classroom to do whatever I needed. I also hadn't bothered applying to colleges, but myself and another person in a similar life situation to me magically had colleges listed when we graduated. It's wild what high-performing schools will do to maintain graduation rate in college acceptance stats. Story 38. ASE certifications don't mean shoot. Literally the last few in-person classes I've been to regarding those certifications. At the end, they literally give you the answers so you can't fail, then you pay for the certification. Story 39. How much product we used to throw away and/or donate on a weekly basis in the bakery department of the membership-based warehouse-type store I work at. Bare minimum, we were scanning out 2 to 3 pallets. At least 6 to 7 feet high, probably a half to 3/4 of $1 million worth of product on a nightly basis. Took the pandemic, a new store manager, and a couple new bakery managers to get those numbers down to where we're scanning out 4 to 5 pallets every week instead of doing that nearly every day. As for the craft store I used to work at, yay, I could write a book on that. Story 40. Dog training boarding facility. Your dog don't get a darn thing you bring in because it's our fault if they eat something overnight and cause a blockage. Story 41. I'm a teacher. Students rapidly dropping attention span and critical thinking is something you see or hear about, but it is very much real. Over the past 3 years, I've noticed kids are being less able to focus for more than 5 minutes without going to drawing or talking to the person next to them. Further, with the addition of strong AI like ChatGPT, they are not being as punished academically as they should be, as they can get entire course notes in 10 seconds and just cram a few days before tests. This will certainly be an issue in 20 years when kids raised on generative AI and low attention spans become our central workforce. But I'll be long retired by then, so EDRM. Story 42. That my former boss was an enabler to men be flirting, asking sexual favors from 18, 22 young interns. He used to save their ass from anything and everything. It was abysmal. Story 43. Most postal workers don't care what's in your package. Story 44. Know what? I am going to gloat. I have been with my org for 5 years. They serve federal and state clients, making things better for people. They do a darn good job. They also treat us employees really well. I wish they paid more, but know what? They ain't been screwing around with sleazy and questionable practices to capture business. I say this because I have worked for companies that went from small to large, and the leadership screwed the clients, the employees in the process. These leaders went from nobodies to household names in the process and made themselves rich. I'm glad I don't work for those kind of people anymore. My company rocks. Story 45. My 2 agency bosses pass massive profit disbursements to their holding company to pay themselves, then show all the agency financials to everyone in quarterly meetings in the name of complete transparency to show that we needed to work harder and couldn't do big raises. They made 1.53x the highest paid employees, me and my counterpart, and did almost nothing. Edit, could not do raises, massive distinction. Story 46. Old workplace. If you buy DVDs from places like Amazon, Ball.com, etc., and they were produced before 2020, they are not new. They are purchased by the sellers at thrift stores or other places, disc cleaned of scratches, new plastic, wrapped around case, and sold new for the full price. Story 47. I can't go into too much detail, but I once worked in a lab at a very prestigious university that was committing copyright infringement by paying several people to manually copy data out of textbooks 8 hours a day. They were also not paying the data entry people the full hours that they worked, and paying them close to minimum wage on top of that. They were also underpaying me, so I quit and moved to a job that gave me a 100 raise Lolo. Story 48. I've shared this before, but when I worked for the local power company in my city doing IT, I discovered that their entire billing system went through a Windows 98 machine on a 28K modem. Story 49. Used to work for a chain of bakeries which has approximately 15 stores. Nearly everything you buy has been par-baked at a central location, frozen and sent overnight to stores, and then rebaked and sold to public. Story 50. Defense industry, specifically in the U.S., part of the reason the military is so expensive to update and maintain is the fact that the government basically just pays whatever the companies tell them things cost without looking into it. A valve costing $3 is sold to the Navy for $30, a computer costing $900 is sold to the Army for $2,400, etc. Don't get me wrong, a lot of stuff is genuinely expensive. I guarantee that the military is paying way too much for it, though. Story 51. Not dirty, but still a liability. How much access developers, engineers have to PII, personally identifiable information, of users, even though that data is supposed to be encrypted protected. Story 52. I taught at a community college in rural Florida. Funding for the school from the FL State Gov is largely tied to enrollment count, graduation rates, and admission of minority students. The president explicitly stated this part. The president went on to say that to boost the minority student count, the school would grow its athletics program to attract more minorities. The president is being totally manipulated by one of his executives, a female, and this executive's husband, a faculty member, to parlay more money for the married couple. One of the recent VP of Academic Affairs and her best friend, then assistant dean, were best friends long before they climbed into those roles. Both were demoted because, allegedly, these two didn't want to give a faculty member tenure because these two didn't personally like the faculty member. My college would accept any student with a pulse. A student used ChatGPT to write multiple papers. The faculty member gave Fs to the student for these submissions and failed the student. After some arm-wringing, the faculty member was instructed to remove the Fs, give the student several weeks to rewrite the papers, and give the student a new semester grade. Administration doesn't give a shoot about academic rigor. They just want to keep accepting anyone and passing everyone. There is a revolving door of nursing professors at the school. Some of the former professors have been too rigorous in their teaching. One of my colleagues got non-renewed because his students' grades weren't high enough, not enough students passing. There is a faculty member who has an Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, accommodation to work from home because of his agoraphobia. One of my colleagues referred to him as the man who's scared of bats. This dismissive colleague is now the handicapped faculty member's boss. Story 53. I used to work at a popular pizza place with roaches. I remember seeing ones here and there and trying to forget about it. Then one day my coworkers was cleaning behind the fridge and hitting the fridge with a broom. There might have been 15-30 of them visibly scurrying around in the bottom of just one fridge. When I handed someone a pizza box one time, one was crawling on the counter towards the guy, and I knocked it off the counter. Definitely didn't get paid enough to deal with that, and the manager was in jerk. We left pizza in the display one day, and he made us clean the walls and floors by hand. He stopped giving me shifts too, like I worked once in 2 weeks. That put me in a really bad spot moving forward, but thankfully I got a real job that pays more than tooks what I was making. Story 54. No kill shelters, just transfer animals to county animal shelters to take care of the tough part. Rescues come through the county shelters and take all the cute animals and then turn around and charge hundreds for them. Most animals are put down because of kennel cough. A lot happen to be a brown pit or a black dog that has a snotty nose or someone heard coughing wink, wink. Answer, you have that one backwards in my county. I work at a no-kill shelter, and our municipal shelter likes to transfer out all the animals with health issues, behavior trouble, and especially the poor fur kids who are so ill that they deserve the piece of that injection. But lo and behold, see how low their euthanasia rates are? Yay, county, hooray! Look at that amazing return on your taxes, which we pay $4 million on a year for. This leaves the rest of us in shelters and rescues to figure out if we can actually help these cats and dogs. And if we can't, we take the hit on our ASMAR rating just so the county can claim their for really and for reals no kill. Story 55. As someone who works in corporate finance, let's just say those offshore accounts get away with a lot of things, but because it's outside of U.S. jurisdiction, there is nothing my company will do to report because company gets paid regardless. Story 56. Well, shoot is going down right now. I'm an apprentice in my first year. The woman in charge of all the apprentices has made out with one of the apprentices during a company party. To add to that, she twerked in front of one of the board members and drunkenly licked the apprentice's throat during a drinking game. She also has a boyfriend of 10 years. She willingly resigned a couple of days ago. Yeah, no, she did not. LMAO. Please excuse my English. It's not my first language. Story 57. I used to work at a kindergarten. They would ask the students to memorize stories in a second language, then record them and create advertisements claiming that the children had mastered the language just because they were enrolled in that kindergarten, even though the kids had only memorized the material. Story 58. For the housing industry, everyone is pretty much everyone. It's like a huge polyamorous workplace. It was not limited to one office, and they mostly have monogamous relationships at home with kids, etc. Last 2 times I worked it, I was hit on. They kept giving hints, like super obvious final workplace after playing stupid no longer worked, and I had to flat out reject. They started making my time there hellish, and one girl was groping me and scolded me when I suddenly just walked off yelling shoot like, I'm your superior, yada yada yada. Customer support industry is mostly drug users, not exclusively, but people typically work it to party, fudge and use. Also, if you're that jerk that yells at the person trying to help you, good luck with your issue. Some don't do anything, and others actively try to make it harder for you purposefully out of spite. So quit being assholes to CS agents, not their fault, and they don't need you unloading your frustrations when they're literally there to help small bonus. Seen some agents put PPL on hold to chill and talk to mates for a bit, then come back 5-10 minutes later to fix your issue almost immediately. Disclaimer, not always the case. Often they actually ask seniors for help. However, just stressing the point, if you are kind to them and view them as humans, they will treat you in kind. Story 59. I work in aviation. Safety is secondary priority. Money is the first one. Story 60. Compostable trays, cups, plates, and such are nearly a scam. A lot of schools got pressured into adopting them because it's green, but then those items do not get sent to composting facilities. They just go to landfills with the rest of the trash. Same for eco-wedding plates and restaurant takeout bags and boxes. Those items may eventually somewhat sort of disintegrate, but to be composted back to actual dirt, they have to be rotated, oxygenated, kept moist, and treated a particular way. They still take sometimes decades or longer to even start to decompose in landfills. If they even decompose at all, it's not as green as everyone thinks it is. Story 61. I work in signage. We have some massive brands under our roof. We make 80 of the signs in our warehouse. It has no air conditioning. The workers smoke all day long. All the signs come out covered in sweat and spittle, and no one cares. Story 62. Recycling and garbage have different bins, but at the end of the night, they go in the same dumpster. Story 63. I used to work at theme parks, and no, the employees are not excited to be there. The pay is universally dog shoot. Benefits and etc. usually amount to, here's a couple days you can come as a guest, and if you get hurt on the job, your ass is gone. Although I'm sure none of this is really a surprise. Story 64. A higher up at a hospital was asking different women to come work on a research paper privately at his house. He was very convincing, as he was grooming you. However, this paper couldn't be done in public places because other people may think it was something romantic. I was one of the ones he invited. He would hound me at work about how this would advance my career and help me get promoted. Thankfully, my husband protected me and said absolutely not. The creep was very persuasive. It is frightening looking back how close I came to being one of his victims. Not too long after, someone reported it to Human Resources. Human Resources found he was inviting many women in the hospital to research and offering promotion as a lure. He was also sending lewd pictures and pressuring women. The hospital offered him paid leave and no questions asked. He took paid leave and found a CEO position at another hospital and teaches at a college too. I found he had invited pretty much every girl on our floor to research with him. He was highly respected by our hospital. He was never sued. It never went to the newspaper and the hospital hushed it up. So he just gets to continue with his abuse in a higher position of power. The hospital made it clear if I talked, I'd be unemployed. Be careful. Sometimes the creeps are the ones that give you the recognition and attention you've always wanted, but it's all part of the grooming. Story 65. Not my current employer, but a previous one. During COVID, the NHS were offering PPE to a lot of businesses in the care sector. From what I understand, they were free at the time because they were seen as a necessity. The small family-run care business I was working for only needed a small number of masks. They did not even use safety goggles. And yet they had weekly deliveries of tons and tons of boxes of the darn things, replenishing the ones they needed and putting the rest in a van to take to their storage unit. I asked them about why we had way more than they needed, to which the owner said, "We may not need them, but may as well take them while they're giving them away." The other highlight, which I came across examples of all too many times, was them transferring staff from their other business, doing the paperwork as if it were a formal recruitment process, but having the director of both companies, one singular person, act as both the recruiter for the new role and the referee for their previous role. Even going as far as having full written references addressed to and from the exact same person. Story 66. Place I work has an ESOP program, employee stock ownership plan. Apparently, the owner of this company has $160 million that he siphoned from company profits and stashed away in a bank account separate from the corporation, thus leading to a gross undervaluation of the company. He's being sued currently on ERISA violations. I would love to tell my fellow coworkers the retirement program here is not what they say it is, but I fear retribution. Story 67. Prior employer Big Evil Tech Company dropped drug testing due to so many employees and managers being on hard, so many complaints of wild parties with an enough sexual harassment to shame the devil myself. Story 68. Some immigration attorneys actually want to help, but a lot, especially those that take cases of detained people, know dang well you are going to lose your case and be deported. But they are going to take thousands of dollars from you first and tell you to not listen to people who tell you that you are wasting money. There's very few laws that protect immigrants from immigration attorney scams. Story 69. I'm leaving the industry, but I used to work with school district administration, and it genuinely makes me so mad. At least in my state, these superintendents and department heads are making six figures. A lot of it comes from taxpayer money, I believe. And most of their job is just signing off paperwork and attending conferences. Most haven't been in classrooms for years, some never, and are so completely out of touch with teachers' needs. Meanwhile, the teachers are barely getting by, and classrooms are getting less money put into them, and more class sizes getting much bigger, harder to control. And that's not even going into the corruption, embezzlement, payments under the table, nepotism, scandals, payoffs to sketchy contractors. Sweeping under the rug, I could go on all day, which is why I am so happy to be leaving this industry. Story 70. This is pretty much common knowledge, but there's an awful lot of people who choose to shoot where they eat at hospitals, and it is almost always a terrible idea. Story 71. Neomenom. If you call customer service for anything, I have worked many jobs where I answer the phone and try to help people with their concern. Freaking out and yelling or berating the person you speak with accomplishes this. It delays the resolution of your concern because the person you spoke with most likely has to carefully document the conversation or meaning about it or decompress. And then sometimes they have to review the entire incident with their superior. So they are familiar with the complaint if it's escalated to them. It also accomplishes this. You have berated someone who is almost certainly not responsible for your problem, cannot change the system or employee that allowed the problem to occur, and does not even make a living wage to boot. It also accomplishes this. It contributes to the people who answer the phone getting burnt out at their jobs and they quit. Now there's one less person to fix the problems, or someone new to answer the phone who is far less skilled at resolving them. The new person doesn't know how to fix the problem, or they haven't built rapport with colleagues who can rapidly solve the problem because the colleague asking for help has always happily and rapidly had their back as well. Cue the problems multiplying and being more difficult to resolve. I dislike changing jobs and just did a lateral transfer to a different medical clinic 20 minutes further at home because it has less staff turnover, a much better manager, and a patient population that is highly unlikely to scream at their front desk, clerical phone team. If for no other reason, don't do this because the person who made you angry and made the system is probably salaried, rich, and golfing right now. The person on the phone is paycheck to paycheck, very tired, and works harder than the golfer at the top. The golfer could not do their job for a day as well as them 99.9% of the time. Story 72. The Rural Electric Co-op is the dumping ground for failed GOP politicians. They lose an election, get a do-nothing job created at the electric utility that tides them over until they can get into office again or become a staffer for another politician. Story 73. Dirty secret, yes. People should know, no, they should know this. I worked as clergy in a specific denomination for a decade. There are some who are genuinely in it because they answered the call to serve. I am thankful to them. They show what a follower of Christ is supposed to be. Someone who welcomes their neighbor and truly follows Christ's teachings. Most, however, are in it for self-gratification and to boost their own ego. They hold trainings, workshops, etc. regularly and say they uphold a certain standard, but in actuality, they only care about education, status, their own image, and money. There is no grace in their work, just narcissism. It's the UMC, by the way. And no, I'm not someone who wanted to split. I welcome all and believe all should have an equal go at life and happiness. Story 74. Walmart deli is nasty, nasty, nasty work, bub. Want some slimy deli meat? Story 75. No one involved still works there, but at one point, 4 out of 7 employees, including the manager and assistant manager, were banging interchangeably. Awkward times all around. Story 76. I didn't get to where I am today sharing workplace secrets. I got to where I am today because I know workplace secrets. Story 77. Fraud advisor in a call center. You know those voice recognition security methods banks have for when you call in? We can listen to every single time you've used it and when you enrolled in it. So don't be taking a shoot, taking a piss, screaming at someone or anything else you wouldn't want a stranger hearing if you ever use those when calling your bank. Story 78. I managed a town place suites. We didn't know what the beeping sound in the laundry room was. Young and stupid. A few weeks later, we realized, oh, it's out of detergent. Sorry to those guests who slept in rinsed sheets. At least it was hot water. Story 79. The coolers that make up the refrigerated aisles in your grocery store are probably full of mold. Story 80. Work with medical records on a pretty regular basis. Would rather not specify my job further, but I can tell you the number of times I see casual HIPAA violations happen in my workplace is astonishing. Colleagues won't hesitate to make fun of what they see in those records either. Also, there is a decent chance your medical records could be used as a form of internal training for a company. So who knows how many people have seen your records internally. Also, at my last job, insurance disputes, we'd receive medical records from all over the state as a third-party mediator, most likely without the patient's knowledge. Probably only legal because they signed off on some document giving consent to distribute without realizing. Story 81. A former job in a drug alcohol probation office. Everyone working there was doing or was a drunk driver. One PO was trading pills with her neighbor just to find out he's on probation in our office with another PO. Some employees steal pills from probationers when they photocopy the pill bottles for the client file. Everyone smoked weed. Only medically legal here. Story 82. I'm a bit late here, but I'll drop it in anyway. The cellar of the pub I worked in frequently floods with sewage. Like it literally fills up with poo, and management tells us that we can't close the pub. We call it the shoot pit. Imagine barrels of beer floating in shoot water with actual turds drifting past them. And we're still serving customers pints all while they complain about the weird smell that we're not allowed to explain. It gets hosed down after every time it happens and disinfected, but there's like cracks and grates in the floor that are caked in this brown pooey residue. Anyway, if you live in an old town with listed buildings and a terrible sewage system, this might happen more than you'd think in other pubs, especially corporate chains that do anything to stay open and make money. No matter how bad shoot gets, literally. Story 83. That my labor is dating my cutter's daughter. Story 84. They refill the Dawn soap dispenser in our break room with generic dish soap. Story 85. I am a scientist. I produce research and have for many institutions. I only produce A research, which is the top journals in the world, where all the best science is published. The dirty secret that is known by many scientists, especially social scientists, is there is a heavy left-wing bias in science, and you cannot publish at good journals anything that goes against the narrative. I say this as a left-wing person. I actually got to work close to probably the #1 race diversity researcher in the world. She is at least top 5. She was discussing a study's results, but one of the findings of the study basically showed, and I am super generalizing here because it was complex, hey, turns out white people aren't racist in America. She said to me dead in the face, we are not reporting those results because it isn't the type of story we want to tell or they want to hear. Story 86. The boss fucks or tries to fudge everyone. I lost some weight and get blonder and tanned. He was so nice to me all of a sudden and always around my desk. Story 87. Used to work at a gas station. The amount of waste is appalling. Pizza didn't get picked up? Trash. Unsold donuts at the end of the day? Trash. Literal trash bags of donuts some days. We weren't allowed to take any of it home. and it was considered theft if we did. But it's okay because there's a 70 markup on anything deli related. So in spite of that, we still made a crazy profit. Story 88. Late, so this might get buried. Keeping this a big vague as the company is pretty retaliatory. I worked for a tech company where a large portion of the workforce were attempting to unionize after a new executive team came in and began stripping away many of the benefits and values of the company. If they had been successful, I believe it would have had a big impact on the industry. This historically remote-friendly company did a forced return to office, specifically targeting the two departments with the highest number of people trying to form the union first. The RTO had ludicrous terms and a short decision window, or the option of a pretty generous severance. Somewhere between 30-40 of the company took a package, essentially killing the unionization effort. The dirty secret, I know that others don't, is that two of the new executives explicitly negotiated that they could work from home in perpetuity in their very lucrative compensation packages. To my knowledge, they continue to do so. I also know that RTO was never on the table until after the executives were notified of the union activity. Cultural cohesion and improved collaboration, my ass. Story 89. Amazon tracks everything you watch, click, play, listen to, and interact with. 247, 365 days a year. They know more about you than you realize. Every word you say around their devices can be scanned, stored, and even accessed by agencies like the NSA. All that data is used to manipulate your behavior, flooding you with hyper-targeted ads until you finally buy things you don't even need. They're not just selling products, they're programming your decisions. Story 90. None. My work is full of good, honest people, and that's why our customers enjoy it. Story 91. When we have meetings, we get food and don't clock out each time. Boss is chill and lets us do it. Story 92. How candy is made. Don't eat candy. Story 93. I worked in trail parts for a bit. Current leaders have no idea how to get to their goals, don't trust their staff, and as a result, they get happy fire half the team, complain nobody's doing anything, and suppliers get upset over the events and leave. Then they're back at step one, renegotiating with the suppliers, while the suppliers ask questions about their leadership. Story 94. I worked for a company that managed online subscriptions for other companies. Mostly B2B, the return policies were atrocious, fluctuating between 7 days after purchase to 60 days or lifetime. Some got specific timeframes like customized but contractualized timeframes like 1 year or 6, 12, 18 months depending on the client's needs. On our end, it was all the same. You would input a timeline picking packages and the duration. We would spend like half an hour discussing various options and warn them that in case anything goes wrong, they should follow the steps first with their IT team and then only contact us after they ran the troubleshooting steps we offered, because if not, this would take a lot of work and days in order for us to help you revert these decisions or fix any problems. The reality is, it's a button switch for us. The engineering team literally programmed our system to work automatically depending on the client needs, but was hard-coded to stop cancellations or returns without contacting support. This would cost companies hundreds to thousands of dollars of their own currency per day in case it was a client that our company wasn't very fond of. Support would have a deal line of a max 2 days for important clients and max 2 weeks for non-VIP clients. The only delays we had was filling nonsensical forms with each client's request on our end for registry. Story 95. We have a bar in the kitchen. Story 96. Former workplace. The amount of bullshit involved in job recruitment firms is insane. These companies often force employees to use their own social media to advertise jobs that don't exist, ones with considerably worse benefits than stated, false labor stats, etc. The one I worked for may well have been a cult. We had to sit around listening to hours and hours of motivational speeches, including testimonials each week. Then they'd scream at you for not making enough phone calls, cold calling, or sending out enough emails. Meanwhile, God's help you if you step away from the PC. If they don't see you on the PC camera, they will call you repeatedly to find out where you are. I was told I had to take my cell phone to the bathroom so I could always be reached. I quit after that. Story 97. Restaurant I worked at in the food court of a mall used to have mice problem. Willing to bet most, if not all, restaurants also have mice. It just doesn't get reported. Story 98. I recently left this workplace, but we had roaches, and then we had a rat in our small ice cream shop. Never contaminated the food, but still gross environment. Story 99. I worked for a surgeon that didn't wash his hands after using the restroom. Story 100. I work at a root canal specialist clinic. They use Clorox bleach to disinfect the drilled out canals. We call it regular to not freak people out. Story Story 101. Worked in bars from 1822. Everyone's someone. Some are everyone. Story 102. Probably bad colleagues. No wonder everyone is quitting the job. Story 103. A girl at my work applies a 30 gratuity to the machine bill before handing it to the customer and explains gratuities included in our facility. It is not, or won't say anything. Basically, steals money from customers. Management decided to let her off with a don't do it again. Story 104. There are many more pedophiles in public schools than you might think. In my 8-year teaching career, 3 of mine were arrested for CP or child molestation, and every time we were totally blindsided. It could literally be anyone. Please talk to your kids regularly and make sure they feel comfortable coming to you when anything feels off. I wish every day I could have done something to intervene. Story 105. That Annie is married but has fucked almost every guy in the office. And everyone is buddy-buddy with her husband when he comes to the office or work events sometimes. Story 106. I worked there one day as a temp for full disclosure. There are old age care homes in your city that are functionally prisons. They're meant for dementia-Alzheimer's patients who can't be trusted not to wander off. The problem is some of the people in there are perfectly functional, don't want to be there, and have nothing better to do but try and escape. For them, it's literally a prison, except they're surrounded by people with dementia and Alzheimer's. I have a hard time imagining a worse hell. Story 107. We don't really know what we're doing, and it's a miracle more stuff doesn't blow up. Story 108. Hospitals don't have enough staff or equipment, and it's only through sheer luck and the skills of the staff that you don't end up dead. Story 109. I work in providing assistive equipment for older people. Think of stuff like a life alert. If you are over 95, it will take longer to get any equipment because our managers are concerned that we go through the whole process, then you pass away in 2 weeks. Time and money wasted, they say. It's disgusting. If you find yourself in this position, just keep calling us till something happens, or it'll take weeks. When for anyone under 95, it will take no more than 1 week. Story 110. Think those consent pop-ups on websites are doing their job? Most of them aren't. Story 111. Just gonna say I'm pleasantly surprised that the top comment is so, relatively, wholesome, and not the clandestine corporate scumbaggery I was expecting. Story 112. Do you think the sea lion was pleased with that response or just a little bit depressed? Story 113. I volunteered with a rescue once. Sea lions are stank, but the elephant seals were dumb and mean. One of them bit through my rubber boot, but luckily didn't break skin. When sea lions are babies, they're kind of like sea puppies, and they're pretty cute. Story 114. I studied seals and can attest to how much marine mammals stink. 2 words, seal farts. Story 115. Although the area is very beautiful, the beaches of La Jolla, CA smell so bad. Those sea lions are fun to look at, but these animals reek like no other. It really ruins the vibe for me. Story 116. What does sea lion breath even smell like? Story 117. This makes me think of that kid with terminal cancer who was given a wish, and he was like, I heard sea lion breath is the worst smell in the world, and I want to verify. Story 118. Some Make-A-Wish kid wanted to meet a seal and smell its breath as their wish. Story 119. We've had a lot of sea lions in the past 2 years in Monterey, CA, and the smell. I live a mile from the wharf where they congregate, and when there's a lot of them, you can smell them from my house. It smells like rotten fish, plus that stuff the cats use to mark their territory, plus urine. So lovely. I did read something about how with global warming, the bay is more hospitable to great whites, so the sea lions come to shore for protection more often. I think we'll be dealing with this stank forever now. Story 120. I worked on a doc about the Fort MacArthur Marine Mammal Rescue, and I can confirm I was only there for like 2 days or so. Story 121. Sea lion used stinky roar. It is super effective. Story 122. You have my dream job. How do you become a marine mammal rescuer? Story 123. I volunteer with an aquarium, and the sea turtles smell so bad. Story 124. I used to live on the California coast. They'd smell really bad, but holy hell, they smelled so horrible when one would wash up dead. I remember a couple times when some of my neighbors, I lived a block away from the beach, would put on a few layers of masks and bring shovels to cover the carcasses in sand to mask some of the smell until someone from some department could come and get rid of it. It smelled so bad that you could smell it probably a couple 100 feet away. It had sat out too long. Story 125. There's a house inspector on TikTok that inspects million-dollar homes and shows all of the shoddy work. It's appalling. Answer: I grew up in a big house. I know big houses, and I was in a lot of big houses as a contractor. Got called into this one to replace a garden door in a 2-year-old build. Gated access, the whole nine. Go in, and I just instantly start seeing bullshit from the get-go. Yes, the house was big, but my God, was it shoddily built. The price they paid didn't mean better quality. It just meant the same shoot quality as every house, just 10 times as much of it. My favorite was that the kitchen island was too close to the built-in refrigerator, so they had to pull the built-in to get a French door traditional fridge so they could open the door to not even 90 degrees. One half fridge door wouldn't open all the way, let alone a proper built-in. Story 126. When I was in high school, I took a class that built a house for donation. I wonder how those houses ended up after a bunch of 14, 16-year-olds built them. We met the family that would live in the house we built. Story 127. Oh man, I knew a contractor who was known for drinking on the job, OSHA violations, and paying under the table. He has some great charisma and a whole pack of people who have helped him weasel out of some legal issues or kept quiet about them. But he does the shoddiest work in general, except of course on his own house. Or if you were a good buddy, maybe your work turned out okay enough. But anybody in the field or had contracted work will warn you to stay far away from the guy. Granted, can't trust many contractors in general for this kind of behavior, but it was pretty appealing since I looked up to the guy as a kid and had my views shattered as I became more aware. Story 128. I am a handyman as well. I probably work on just as many new homes, less than 2 years old, than I do older homes. Everything from ceiling fan only being held up by the sheetrock to 3 stories of decks screwed down with sheetrock screws, and all the screws have disintegrated and deck boards just laying not attached. This is just 2 stories. I have hundreds more. The homeowners say it is cheaper to pay me than dealing with the builder that won't call them back or having to deal with taking someone to court. Also, these are not cheap home $1 million plus homes. In some case, $35 million homes. It is crazy to me how people get away with bad work so easily.